The champagne flutes caught the light like tiny prisons, each one reflecting fragments of faces I'd worked so hard to bring together. 200 of Boston's most generous donors filled the ballroom of the Fairmont Copley Plaza. Their conversations, creating a symphony of calculated philanthropy. I should have felt proud. My nonprofit, Hearts for Health, was about to announce our largest fundraising milestone yet, $3 million raised for cardia screening programs in underserved communities. Instead, I felt like I was drowning in designer perfume and performative compassion. "Ava, you look absolutely radiant," Mrs. Pemberton gushed, her Botoxed forehead betraying nothing of actual emotion. "This event is simply divine. Though I do hope the catering meets the standards we discussed." I smiled the smile I'd perfected. Over 29 years of being the good daughter, the responsible one, the one who made things work. "Everything is exactly as planned, Mrs. Pemberton. Thank you so much for your generous contribution." She squeezed my arm with manicured talons. "Of course, dear. Anything for such a worthy cause. Now, where did you say the silent auction items were displayed?" As she glided away in a cloud of Chanel No. 5, I caught my reflection in the mirrored wall behind the bar. The woman staring back looked polished, professional, successful. The burgundy silk dress I'd chosen hung perfectly on my small frame, my mother's pearls catching the light at my throat. But there was something in my eyes, a tiredness that no amount of concealer could hide. My phone buzzed against my clutch. A text from Jules, my best friend and the closest thing I had to a real sister. "You're killing it tonight. Stop overthinking and enjoy your moment. You've earned this." Before I could respond, another message appeared, this one from my actual sister. "Ava, emergency. The contractor used ocean whisper instead of meditation blue in my guest bathroom. I'm literally having a panic attack. This could ruin everything. Call me now." I stared at the screen, that familiar knot forming in my stomach. Chloe's emergencies always seemed to coincide with my important moments. My college graduation had been overshadowed by her breakup with a guy she'd dated for 3 weeks. My promotion to nonprofit director had been upstaged by her decision to become a lifestyle influencer. And now, on the night I was supposed to celebrate the biggest achievement of my career, she was having a meltdown over paint colors. I tucked the phone away without responding. "Tonight was mine, ladies and gentlemen. If I could have your attention, please." The event coordinator's voice cut through the chatter as the lights dimmed slightly. "It's time for our keynote presentation." My heart rate picked up as I made my way to the small stage at the front of the ballroom. This was at the moment I'd been preparing for weeks. I'd written and rewritten the speech, crafting it to tell the story of why cardiac health mattered, why early screening saved lives, why our work was more than just medicine, it was hope. The spotlight found me as I stepped behind the podium, and suddenly the crowd fell silent. 200 faces turned toward me, expectant. I gripped the edges of the lectern and began. 3 years ago, my best friend's mother collapsed at her kitchen table while making dinner for her family. My voice carried clearly through the sound system, steady and strong. She was 45 years old, had no prior symptoms, and died before the ambulance arrived. A simple cardiac screening 6 months earlier would have caught the blockage that killed her. I paused, letting the weight of those words settle over the room. This was the story that had driven me to create Hearts for Health, the memory that fueled every late night and early morning I'd spent building something that mattered. That woman's name was Sarah Chen, and she left behind 3 children and a husband who had no idea that a 15-minute test could have saved her life. I clicked to the next slide, showing the statistics we'd compiled. In communities like Sarah's, where healthcare access is limited and preventive care is a luxury, cardiac events are the leading cause of unexpected death for women over 35. The room was completely silent now, hanging on every word. I should have felt energized by their attention, empowered by the platform I'd built. Instead, a strange dizziness began to creep in at the edges of my vision. But here's what I've learned in the 3 years since we started this work. I gripped the podium tighter as the room seemed to tilt slightly. We can't just treat the symptoms. We have to address the root causes: access, education, cultural barriers that prevent women from advocating for their own health. The fluorescent lights above me flickered, or maybe it was my vision starting to blur. I tried to focus on my notes, but the words seemed to swim together on the page. My heart wasn't just racing from nerves anymore, it was trying to escape my chest entirely. And as you can see from our Q3 projections, my voice wavered. the sentence trailing off as the PowerPoint slides began to transform into a kaleidoscope of meaningless colors. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. Miss Nguyen, are you all right? Someone called from the back of the room. I opened my mouth to respond, to make some excuse about the lights or nerves or too much coffee. But nothing came out. The concerned faces in the audience began to blur together, their worried expressions melting into abstract shapes. The room tilted sideways, and suddenly I was watching the ornate ceiling panel spin above me as my body crumpled to the floor. The last thing I saw before darkness claimed me was Mrs. Pemberton's horrified face, her Botox finally failing her as genuine shock broke through. I'm dying, I thought with strange clarity. I'm dying in the middle of the most important presentation of my career. Voices erupted around me like a symphony of panic. Call 911, is she breathing? Clear the room, give her space. I felt hands on me checking for a pulse, loosening my dress collar. Someone's jacket being placed over my chest. Through the chaos, I heard Sarah Martinez, my assistant, her voice tight with fear as she spoke into her phone. Double quotes, yes. This is an emergency. We need an ambulance at the Fairmont Copley Plaza immediately. A woman collapsed during a presentation. She's unconscious but breathing. I tried to open my eyes, to tell them I was okay, that this was just stress or exhaustion or anything other than what the growing cold in my chest suggested it might be. But my body had betrayed me completely, leaving me trapped in a shell that no longer responded to my commands. Sarah's face appeared above me, her usually perfect makeup already starting to run. Ava, stay with me, the ambulance is coming, you're going to be okay, call my parents. I wanted to say, call Chloe, tell them what happened, but even as the thought formed, another part of me, the part that had been watching my family's patterns for 29 years, wondered if they would even care. When had they ever put my needs first? When had my emergencies ever taken precedence over Chloe's drama? As if summoned by my thoughts, my phone started ringing somewhere in the chaos. Sarah must have grabbed it from my purse because I heard her answer. Hello, this is Sarah Martinez. I'm Ava Nguyen's assistant. No, she can't come to the phone right now. She's in an ambulance. A pause. What do you mean you can't leave right now? This is a medical emergency, I understand. But okay, I'll call you when we know more. Even semi-conscious and fighting for my life, I felt the familiar sting of disappointment. Chloe couldn't be bothered to interrupt her pain crisis for her sister's collapse. The paramedics arrived with professional efficiency, their voices calm and measured as they worked around me. I felt the sharp prick of N4, the pressure of a blood pressure cuff, the cold press of a stethoscope against my chest. Female, approximately 30 years old, collapsed during a public speaking event. BP is 180/120, heart rate irregular at 150, patient is semi-conscious, responsive to pain stimuli. 30. I wanted to correct them. I'm 29 for 3 more weeks. But the numbers they were reciting scared me more than the mistake. Those weren't normal numbers. Those were the numbers of someone whose body was failing. Ava, can you hear me? The paramedic's voice cut through my haze. We're going to take you to Massachusetts General. You're having some kind of cardiac event. But you're stable right now. Cardiac event. The irony would have been funny if it weren't so terrifying. I'd spent 3 years raising money to prevent exactly this kind of emergency, and now I was living it. As they lifted me onto the stretcher, I caught a glimpse of the ballroom I was leaving behind. The elegant crowd had dispersed, leaving behind abandoned champagne glasses and scattered programs. The presentation screen still displayed my final slide. Together, we save lives. Sarah appeared beside the stretcher as they wheeled me toward the exit. I'm coming with you, she said firmly when one of the paramedics started to object. She doesn't have family in the city. That wasn't exactly true. My parents lived 20 minutes away in Newton, and Chloe's condo was even closer in Back Bay. But Sarah was right in the way that mattered. I didn't have family who would show up. As the ambulance doors closed and the sirens began to wail, I tried one more time to move, to speak, to take control of what was happening to me. Instead, I felt myself slipping away, consciousness fading as we raced through the streets of Boston toward an uncertain future. The last coherent thought I had was a memory from childhood, one of those moments that cuts through time with perfect clarity. I was 8 years old, doubled over with stomach pain that made me vomit and cry. My mother had been annoyed at the disruption to her bridge game, insisting I was being dramatic. It wasn't until my fever spiked to 100 that they'd taken me to the emergency room, where doctors discovered my appendix had nearly ruptured. She's always been a bit of a hypochondriac, my mother had told the surgeon, as if my near-death experience was somehow an inconvenience I'd manufactured for attention. Now, as darkness closed in around me, I wondered if this was just another case of Ava being dramatic, or if this time, my body's rebellion was something even my family's indifference couldn't dismiss. The ambulance hit a pothole, jolting me back toward consciousness just long enough to hear the paramedic radio ahead. ETA 5 minutes. Prep cardiac for emergency admission. Then everything went black, and I was alone with the sound of my own heartbeat, irregular, frightened, and fighting to keep me alive. Later, much later, I would learn that Sarah had tried to reach my parents for more times during the ambulance ride. Each call had gone to voicemail. She'd texted my mother, my father, and Chloe with increasing urgency. Ava collapsed. Emergency surgery. Massachusetts General Hospital, please come. The first response came 3 hours after I was wheeled into the operating room. It was from my mother. Can't leave right now. Chloe is beside herself about the bathroom situation. We'll try to make it tomorrow. But I didn't know any of that yet. All I knew was the cold, and the darkness, and the growing certainty that this moment would change everything, not just because I might die, but because of who wasn't there to care if I did. The first thing I became aware of was the beeping, steady, rhythmic, mechanical, like a digital heartbeat that had replaced my own. The second thing was the cold, not the dramatic, life-leaving kind of cold from before, but the sterile, institutional cold of places where people went to either get better or die. I tried to open my eyes, but my eyelids felt weighted with lead. Everything was fuzzy around the edges, like looking through frosted glass. Slowly, fragments of sensation began to piece themselves together. The scratch of starched sheets against my skin, the pressure of something taped to my hand, the antiseptic smell that could only mean hospital. Massachusetts General, I remembered. Cardiac event, she's waking up. The voice was female, gentle but professional. Ava, can you hear me? You're in the ICU at Mass General. You had surgery, but you're stable now. I managed to crack my eyes open, squinting against the fluorescent lights that seemed impossibly bright. A woman in scrubs stood beside my bed, middle-aged, with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her badge read Dr. Maya Bell, cardiothoracic surgery. Hi there, she said, offering a reassuring smile. I'm Dr. Bell. I performed your surgery about 6 hours ago. How are you feeling? I tried to speak, but only a croak emerged. My throat felt raw, like I'd been screaming, though I couldn't remember making any sound at all. That's normal, Dr. Bell said, anticipating my concern. You were intubated during surgery here. Small sips. She held a cup of water with a straw to my lips. The water was the most beautiful thing I'd ever tasted. After a few careful sips, I found my voice. What happened to me? You had what we call a spontaneous coronary artery dissection, essentially. One of the arteries supplying blood to your heart developed a tear in its wall. It's rare, especially in someone your age, but it can be life-threatening if not treated immediately. The words hit me like physical blows. Coronary artery, life-threatening. I was 29 years old. I ran 3 miles every morning. I ate kale salads and took vitamins and had never smoked a cigarette in my life. But I'm healthy, I whispered, as if saying it could make it true. Dr. Bell's expression softened. Sometimes these things just happen. The good news is we caught it in time. We were able to repair the dissection with a stent, and your heart function looks good. You're going to recover fully. But it was touch and go for a while there. Touch and go. I could have died, should have died, maybe. The reality of it settled over me like a heavy blanket. How long have I been here? I asked. About 8 hours total. You've been unconscious since the surgery finished around 2 a.m. 8 hours. 8 hours since I'd collapsed in front of 200 people. Since Sarah had called for help. Since my life had quite literally stopped and restarted. Is anyone? I hesitated. Not sure I wanted to know the answer. Did my family come? Something flickered across Dr. Bell's face, a micro-expression that spoke volumes. She glanced at the chart in her hands, then back at me. Your assistant, Sarah, stayed until about an hour ago. She left a note saying she'd be back this morning. She's in an ambulance. A pause. What do you mean you can't leave right now? This is a medical emergency, I understand. But okay, I'll call you when we know more. Even semi-conscious and fighting for my life, I felt the familiar sting of disappointment. Chloe couldn't be bothered to interrupt her paint crisis for her sister's collapse. The paramedics arrived with professional efficiency, their voices calm and measured as they worked around me. I felt the sharp prick of N4, the pressure of a blood pressure cuff, the cold press of a stethoscope against my chest. Female, approximately 30 years old, collapsed during a public speaking event. BP is 180/120, heart rate irregular at 150, patient is semi-conscious, responsive to pain stimuli, 30. I wanted to correct them, I'm 29 for 3 more weeks. But the numbers they were reciting scared me more than the mistake. Those weren't normal numbers. Those were the numbers of someone whose body was failing. Ava, can you hear me? The paramedic's voice cut through my haze. We're going to take you to Massachusetts General. You're having some kind of cardiac event. But you're stable right now, cardiac event. The irony would have been funny if it weren't so terrifying. I'd spent 3 years raising money to prevent exactly this kind of emergency, and now I was living it. As they lifted me onto the stretcher, I caught a glimpse of the ballroom I was leaving behind. The elegant crowd had dispersed, leaving behind abandoned champagne glasses and scattered programs. The presentation screen still displayed my final slide. Together, we save lives. Sarah appeared beside the stretcher as they wheeled me toward the exit. I'm coming with you, she said firmly when one of the paramedics started to object. She doesn't have family in the city. That wasn't exactly true. My parents lived 20 minutes away in Newton, and Chloe's condo was even closer in Back Bay. But Sarah was right in the way that mattered. I didn't have family who would show up. As the ambulance doors closed and the sirens began to wail, I tried one more time to move, to speak, to take control of what was happening to me. Instead, I felt myself slipping away. Consciousness fading as we raced through the streets of Boston toward an uncertain future. The last coherent thought I had was a memory from childhood, one of those moments that cuts through time with perfect clarity. I was 8 years old, doubled over with stomach pain that made me vomit and cry. My mother had been annoyed at the disruption to her bridge game, insisting I was being dramatic. It wasn't until my fever spiked to 100 for that they'd taken me to the emergency room, where doctors discovered my appendix had nearly ruptured. She's always been a bit of a hypochondriac, my mother had told the surgeon, as if my near-death experience was somehow an inconvenience I'd manufactured for attention. Now, as darkness closed in around me, I wondered if this was just another case of Ava being dramatic, or if this time, my body's rebellion was something even my family's indifference couldn't dismiss. The ambulance hit a pothole, jolting me back toward consciousness, just long enough to hear the paramedic radio ahead. ETA 5 minutes. Prep cardiac for emergency admission. Then everything went black, and I was alone with the sound of my own heartbeat, irregular, frightened, and fighting to keep me alive. Later, much later, I would learn that Sarah had tried to reach my parents 4 more times during the ambulance ride. Each call had gone to voicemail. She'd texted my mother, my father, and Chloe with increasing urgency. Ava collapsed, emergency surgery. Massachusetts General Hospital, please come. The first response came 3 hours after I was wheeled into the operating room. It was from my mother. Can't leave right now. Chloe is beside herself about the bathroom situation. We'll try to make it tomorrow. But I didn't know any of that yet. All I knew was the cold, and the darkness, and the growing certainty that this moment would change everything, not just because I might die, but because of who wasn't there to care if I did. The first thing I became aware of was the beeping, steady, rhythmic, mechanical, like a digital heartbeat that had replaced my own. The second thing was the cold, not the dramatic, life-leaving kind of cold from before, but the sterile, institutional cold of places where people went to either get better or die. I tried to open my eyes, but my eyelids felt weighted with lead. Everything was fuzzy around the edges, like looking through frosted glass. Slowly, fragments of sensation began to piece themselves together. The scratch of starched sheets against my skin, the pressure of something taped to my hand, the antiseptic smell that could only mean hospital. Massachusetts General, I remembered. Cardiac event, she's waking up. The voice was female, gentle but professional. Ava, can you hear me? You're in the ICU at Mass General. You had surgery, but you're stable now. I managed to crack my eyes open, squinting against the fluorescent lights that seemed impossibly bright. A woman in scrubs stood beside my bed, middle-aged, with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her badge read Dr. Maya Bell, cardiothoracic surgery. "Hi there," she said, offering a reassuring smile. "I'm Dr. Bell. I performed your surgery about 6 hours ago. How are you feeling?" I tried to speak, but only a croak emerged. My throat felt raw, like I'd been screaming, though I couldn't remember making any sound at all. "That's normal," Dr. Bell said, anticipating my concern. "You were intubated during surgery here." Small sips, she held a cup of water with a straw to my lips. The water was the most beautiful thing I'd ever tasted. After a few careful sips, I found my voice. What happened to me?" "You had what we call a spontaneous coronary artery dissection, essentially. One of the arteries supplying blood to your heart developed a tear in its wall. It's rare, especially in someone your age, but it can be life-threatening if not treated immediately." The words hit me like physical blows. Coronary artery, life-threatening. I was 29 years old. I ran 3 miles every morning. I ate kale salads and took vitamins and had never smoked a cigarette in my life. "But I'm healthy," I whispered, as if saying it could make it true. Dr. Bell's expression softened. "Sometimes these things just happen. The good news is we caught it in time. We were able to repair the dissection with a stent, and your heart function looks good. You're going to recover fully." But it was touch and go for a while there. Touch and go. I could have died, should have died, maybe. The reality of it settled over me like a heavy blanket. "How long have I been here?" I asked. "About 8 hours total. You've been unconscious since the surgery finished around 2 a.m. 8 hours. 8 hours since I'd collapsed in front of 200 people. Since Sarah had called for help. Since my life had quite literally stopped and restarted. Is anyone?" I hesitated. Not sure I wanted to know the answer. "Did my family come?" Something flickered across Dr. Bell's face, a micro-expression that spoke volumes. She glanced at the chart in her hands, then back at me. "Your assistant, Sarah, stayed until about an hour ago. She left a note saying she'd be back this morning." Then the third, and the fourth, each signature feeling like a small act of revolution. "What about your nonprofit board?" Daniel asked. "Your father's position there gives him access to donor information, financial records, strategic planning. Are you comfortable with that?" I thought about the gala last night, about all the work I'd put into building something meaningful, something that could save lives. The idea of my father having access to that world, potentially undermining it with his poor judgment or using it for his own benefit, made my stomach turn. "Remove him," I said firmly. "Emergency board meeting, cite health concerns." Mine as the reason for immediate restructuring. Daniel made notes. "We'll need to move fast on this. Once they realize what's happening, they might try to access whatever they can before we cut them off." As if summoned by his words, my phone buzzed. A text from my mother. "Mom to 47 p.m. Ava, honey, I hope you're feeling better. Chloe is calmer now that the pain situation is resolved. We're planning to come by later this afternoon. Could you call the bank? There seems to be some issue with the joint account." I showed the message to Daniel, who grimaced. "They're already trying to access your money. Probably saw the account restrictions when they tried to make a withdrawal." "That was fast," I said. "Desperation usually is." He gathered the signed forms. "I'll file these immediately. Everything should be processed within the hour." Another text came through. This one from Chloe. "Chloe to 52 p.m. Ava, WTF, my card got declined at Whole Foods. This is so embarrassing. Fix this now." I stared at the message, feeling something cold and sharp settle in my chest. Not hurt this time, clarity. Even now, even after everything, Chloe's first instinct wasn't to ask how I was feeling or whether I needed anything. It was to demand that I solve her problems. "She doesn't even know I had surgery," I said quietly. Daniel looked at the text. "Does that surprise you?" "No. But it should, shouldn't it? It should surprise me that my sister doesn't know I almost died. The fact that it doesn't surprise you should tell you everything you need to know about this relationship." I set the phone face down again. Decision crystallizing. I want to write something, a statement for work, for social media, something that explains why I'm going to be unavailable for a while. What kind of statement? The truth, not the whole truth, not yet, but enough to start the conversation. I looked at him seriously. I want people to know what it's like to be the responsible one in a family that only cares about responsibility when it benefits them. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Ava, once you put something like that out there, you can't take it back. It will change everything. Everything is already changed, I said, gesturing at the machines keeping me alive. I just need to catch up to reality. He nodded slowly. Okay, but let's be strategic about this. You're not just Ava Nguyen the person, you're Ava Nguyen the nonprofit director, the public figure. Whatever you write will be scrutinized. Good, I said. I want it to be scrutinized. I want people to think about what family really means, and what we owe each other, and what happens when love becomes a one-way street. Daniel packed up his briefcase, leaving the signed forms in a neat stack on my bedside table. I'll get these processed and start drafting the board resolution. You focus on recovering, and Ava, yeah, for what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing. It's going to hurt like hell, but it's right. After he left, I sat in the quiet of my hospital room, watching the afternoon sun paint geometric patterns on the walls. My phone continued to buzz with increasingly frantic messages from my family, but I didn't look at them. Instead, I opened my laptop. Sarah had brought it earlier along with some clothes and began to write. The cost of being the responsible one, a personal reflection history. I collapsed from a heart attack while giving a presentation about cardiac health. The irony wasn't lost on me. What was lost on me for about 29 years was the understanding that some kinds of stress can literally kill you. While I was in surgery, my family was dealing with their own crisis, choosing between paint colors for a bathroom renovation, not a metaphor, actual paint, ocean whisper versus meditation blue. This essay isn't about paint colors, it's about priorities and love. And what happens when you spend your entire life being the person everyone else leans on, only to discover they won't even show up when you're the one falling down? I paused, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Once I published this, there would be no going back. My family would be exposed, our dysfunction laid bare for the world to see. They would never forgive me. But as I looked at my phone, still buzzing with demands and complaints and not a single question about my well-being, I realized I was okay with that. More than okay, I was ready. The heart monitor beside my bed continued its steady rhythm, proof that I was still here, still fighting, still alive. And for the first time in my adult life, I was going to use that life for something other than making other people comfortable. I kept writing. The flowers arrived before they did. 24 white roses in a crystal vase that probably cost more than most people's weekly groceries, accompanied by a card that read, "Get well soon, darling, love, Mom and Dad." No mention of the 3 days of silence, no acknowledgement of the missed calls, the ignored texts, the hours I'd spent wondering if they cared whether I lived or died. Just expensive flowers and endearments that felt as artificial as the baby's breath artfully ranged between the stems. I was sitting up in bed, laptop balanced on my knees, putting the finishing touches on my essay when they finally made their entrance. The ICU had moved me to a private room that morning. Dr. Bell said my vitals were stable enough that I no longer needed constant monitoring, though I suspected she'd also grown tired of watching me field increasingly unhinged messages from my family. "Ava, sweetheart." My mother's voice carried that particular blend of forced cheer and martyred exhaustion that I knew meant she was about to make my medical emergency somehow about her suffering. "Gee, oh honey, you look so pale." Lan Nguyen swept into the room like she was arriving at a social function she was already late for, which, I supposed, she was at 53. She still carried herself with the rigid posture of someone who'd learned early that appearances were everything. Her Hermes bag was perfectly positioned, her makeup flawless despite the supposed urgency of visiting her daughter in the hospital. Behind her, my father shuffled in with the uncomfortable expression of a man who'd been dragged somewhere he didn't want to be. Min Nguyen had perfected the art of being physically present while emotionally absent, and today was no exception. "Hello, Ba, Ma." I closed my laptop and set it aside, studying their faces for any sign of genuine concern or relief that I was alive. I found only the familiar mixture of obligation and mild irritation that characterized most of our interactions. "Darling, we're so sorry we couldn't come sooner," my mother said, settling into the visitor's chair and immediately rearranging her purse and jacket as if she was planning to stay for exactly the socially acceptable amount of time and not a minute longer. You cannot imagine the crisis we've been dealing with. Actually, I can imagine it perfectly, I said evenly. Ocean whisper versus meditation blue, right? Something flickered across her face, surprise, maybe, that I knew the details of the catastrophe that had taken priority over my near-death experience. Well, yes, but it's not just about the paint, Ava, you know how sensitive Chloe is. The stress of the renovation has been absolutely overwhelming for her. She's been having panic attacks, chest pains, I repeated, touching the bandage over my own chest where they'd cracked it open to save my life, terrible ones. Dr. Patel says it's anxiety, but you know how these things can escalate. We simply couldn't leave her alone in that state. I stared at my mother, waiting for her to hear what she'd just said, to realize that she'd prioritized my sister's anxiety-induced chest pains over my actual cardiac surgery, but her expression remained expectant. As if she was waiting for me to nod sympathetically and agree that of course Chloe's wellness came first. Where is Chloe? I asked instead. She wanted to come. Truly she did. But she's meeting with the contractor this afternoon. They're redoing the crown molding to complement the new paint color. And she needs to be there to supervise. You understand. I understand perfectly. My father cleared his throat, finally speaking for the first time since they'd arrived. How are you feeling, Ava? The doctors say you're going to be fine. The doctors say I had a spontaneous coronary artery dissection that required emergency surgery to prevent sudden cardiac death, I said, using the clinical language Dr. Bell had taught me. So yes, I'm going to be fine, thanks for asking. 3 days later, he had the grace to look uncomfortable. We would have come sooner. But you had more important things to do, I know. The silence that followed was thick with years of unspoken resentments. I could see my parents exchanging glances, trying to figure out what was different about me, why I wasn't rushing to make them feel better about their choices. Ava, honey. My mother said carefully, you seem upset. I tested the word, rolling it around in my mouth like something foreign. Yes, Ma, I suppose I am upset. I'm upset that my family couldn't be bothered to visit me in the hospital for 3 days because my sister was having a tantrum about paint colors. I'm upset that you sent me flowers instead of showing up. I'm upset that the first thing you asked about wasn't my health, but whether I understood why Chloe's anxiety was more important than my surgery. Now, Ava, that's not fair. What's not fair? I interrupted, feeling decades of suppressed anger finally finding its voice, is that I've spent my entire adult life being your backup plan. The responsible one, the one who fixes problems and pays bills and shows up when needed. And when I needed you, when I was literally fighting for my life, you weren't here. My mother's perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the flush creeping up her neck. You're being dramatic, darling. You're fine now. Everything worked out. Everything worked out because the doctors saved my life, not because my family supported me through it. We're here now, my father said quietly. As if showing up 3 days late deserved some kind of credit. Are you really here? I gestured at their positioning in the room. My mother perched on the edge of her chair like she was ready to flee. My father standing near the door with his hands in his pockets. Because it feels like you're here because you have to be, not because you want to be. Of course we want to be here, my mother protested. You're our daughter, am I? Because daughters are usually prioritized over bathroom renovations. The words hung in the air like a challenge. I watched my parents process them, saw the moment they realized this conversation wasn't going to follow the usual script where I absorbed their poor behavior and made excuses for their selfishness. Ava, my mother said slowly, I don't know what's gotten into you, but this attitude is very concerning. The stress of your illness has obviously affected your judgment. There it was. The familiar pattern of deflection and gaslighting that had defined my childhood and followed me into adulthood. Anytime I'd expressed dissatisfaction or hurt, it was because something was wrong with me, not with their behavior. My judgment is fine, Ma, clearer than it's been in years. Actually, my father shifted uncomfortably. Perhaps we should discuss this when you're feeling better. These medications can affect your mood. This isn't the medication talking, this is 29 years of being treated like an afterthought finally catching up with reality. That's not true, my mother said. But her voice lacked conviction. We've always been proud of you, always supported. You've been proud of what I could do for you, I corrected. My success reflects well on you, my money solves your problems. My reputation opens doors for Chloe. But when have you ever supported me just because I needed it? We supported you through college. I had a full scholarship. We've supported your career. You put Ba on my nonprofit board so you could feel important at the galas. We've supported your relationship choices. You've never asked about my relationships. You don't even know if I'm seeing anyone. Each deflection fell flat. Exposed for the hollow justification it was. I could see them scrambling, trying to find solid ground in a conversation that had shifted completely out of their control. My phone, which had been mercifully quiet for the past hour, suddenly erupted with a FaceTime call. Chloe's name flashed on the screen, along with her contact photo, a carefully curated selfie taken in perfect lighting. "Oh, wonderful," my mother exclaimed, reaching for the phone. "Chloe can explain about the renovation crisis. You'll understand once you hear." "No," I declined the call and set the phone face down. "I'm not interested in Chloe's explanations, Ava." My mother looked genuinely shocked. "She's your sister. She's been worried sick about you." Worried sick? I pulled up my text messages and scrolled through the last 3 days of communication from Chloe. Let's see. Complaints about the contractor. Demands that I fix her credit card situation. A live stream of her crying in the paint store. More complaints about crown molding. And exactly 0 questions about my health or recovery. I handed the phone to my mother, watching her face as she read through the messages. For a moment, something like recognition flickered in her eyes, a brief acknowledgement of how bad this looked when laid out so starkly. "She expresses concern differently," my mother said weakly. "She doesn't express concern at all. She expresses demands." The phone rang again. This time my mother answered it herself, putting it on speaker before I could object. "Chloe, darling, we're here with Ava, finally. God, this has been the worst week of my life. Ava, you will not believe what this contractor did. After we sorted out the paint situation, he installed the wrong fixtures in the guest bathroom, the wrong ones. I specifically said brushed nickel, and he used polished chrome, with ocean whisper walls. It looks like a tacky hotel." I stared at the phone, waiting for her to ask how I was feeling, waiting for any acknowledgement that I'd been in the hospital, waiting for my sister to behave like a sister. "The whole aesthetic is ruined," Chloe continued, her voice rising with familiar hysteria. "I've been documenting everything for my Instagram story, but my followers are getting tired of the renovation drama. I need to pivot to something else, but I can't focus because of this bathroom nightmare. Ava, can you call your contractor friend and get a recommendation for someone who actually knows the difference between finishes?" "Chloe," I said quietly, "and don't even get me started on the cost. This renovation was supposed to cost $15,000, but with all these mistakes and do-overs, it's going to be closer to $25. I know I'm maxed out on my cards, but maybe you could." "Chloe, what? Do you know where I am right now?" There was a pause. "Aren't you at work?" "It's a Thursday." I closed my eyes, feeling the last fragile thread of hope that my sister might care about me finally snap. "I'm in the hospital, Chloe. I had a heart attack 3 days ago. Emergency surgery. I almost died." Another pause, longer this time. "Oh, wow, are you okay?" "Am I okay?" I repeated the question, tasting its inadequacy. "I'm alive. No thanks to any of you." "Well, you don't have to be dramatic about it. I mean, you're obviously fine if you're talking to me, and it's not like we could have done anything anyway. It's not like any of us are doctors." I opened my eyes and looked at my parents, wondering if they could hear what I was hearing, the complete absence of empathy, the reflexive self-centeredness, the casual cruelty of someone who couldn't conceive of anyone else's needs mattering more than her own convenience. "You could have been here," I said simply. "I was dealing with a crisis, Ava. You know how contractor problems stress me out. I get actual physical symptoms. Mom and Dad had to stay with me because I was having chest pains from stress." "About bathroom fixtures," I said slowly, "while I was having actual chest surgery." "It's not a competition," Chloe snapped. "Just because you had some medical thing doesn't mean my problems aren't valid." "Some medical thing?" That's what she called my near-death experience. "Some medical thing, you're right," I said, surprising everyone, including myself. "It's not a competition, because in a competition, there would be some kind of contest. This isn't a contest. This is just who you are." "What's that supposed to mean?" I looked at my parents again, seeing them clearly. For perhaps the first time in my life, they weren't monsters, they weren't evil. They were just people who had never learned to see past their own needs. who had raised one daughter to be their emotional and financial support system and another to be their eternal project. It means I'm done, I said simply. Done with what? My mother asked nervously. Done pretending this is normal. Done making excuses for behavior that would be unacceptable from strangers, let alone family. Done being the responsible one in relationships where responsibility only goes one way. Ava, you're clearly upset about your health scare, my father said in the patronizing tone he'd perfected over the years. Maybe we should let you rest and discuss this when you're feeling more stable. I am stable. Bah, for the first time in my adult life, I'm completely stable. I know exactly who you all are, and I know exactly what I'm worth to you. I reached for the call button. I think visiting hours are over. Ava, my mother stood up, finally showing some urgency. You can't just dismiss us like this, actually. I can, it's what you've been doing to me for 29 years. I'm just finally returning the favor. The nurse who responded to my call was a young woman named Jessica who took one look at the scene, my family's shocked faces, my calm demeanor, the tension crackling in the air, and nodded knowingly. I'm sorry, but the patient needs to rest. Now, she said professionally, visiting hours end at 8 p.m., but we just got here, my mother protested. 3 days late, I added quietly. Jessica looked at me. Would you like your visitors to leave now? Yes, please, we're her parents, my father said, as if that should override my medical wishes. And she's an adult who has the right to control her own visitors, Jessica replied smoothly. Ma'am, sir, I'll need to ask you to go now. I watched my parents gather their things with the kind of bewildered indignation that came from having their authority challenged for the first time. My mother paused at the door, clearly struggling with how to regain control of a situation that had slipped completely out of her hands. Ava, honey, I think you should consider counseling when you get out of here. This kind of hostility toward family isn't healthy. You're right, I said. It's not healthy to be hostile toward family. It's also not healthy to treat family like they're disposable. I'll definitely be getting counseling to figure out how to have healthy relationships with people who actually care about me. She opened her mouth to respond, then seemed to think better of it. My father was already in the hallway, clearly eager to escape a conversation that had gone so far outside his comfort zone. We'll be back tomorrow, my mother said, as if issuing a threat. No, I said clearly, you won't. I'm adding you to the restricted visitor list. If you want to see me again, you can call first and ask permission like everyone else. You can't. I can, and I am. After they left, Jessica lingered by my bedside, checking my vitals with unnecessary thoroughness. You okay? She asked quietly. I will be, I said, and meant it. She nodded and headed for the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I heard most of that conversation. You did the right thing. Alone again, I picked up my laptop and opened the essay I'd been working on. 3 days of anger and clarity had sharpened it into something more powerful than I'd originally intended. It wasn't just a personal story anymore, it was a reckoning. I read through it one more time, then hit publish. The Cost of Being the Responsible One went live on my blog at 8:47 p.m. on a Thursday night. By the time I fell asleep an hour later, it had already been shared 100 times. I had no idea that by morning my family's carefully constructed world would be falling apart, and my new life would finally be beginning. I woke up to 847 notifications. My phone, which I'd silenced before falling asleep, was vibrating against the bedside table like an angry insect. The digital clock read 6:23 a.m., and pale morning light was filtering through the hospital blinds, painting everything in soft grays and blues that reminded me, ironically, of Chloe's paint crisis. The first notification I opened was from Jules, timestamped at 2:17 a.m. Holy shit, Ava, your essay is everywhere. Call me when you see this. The second was from Sarah, my assistant. Your blog crashed from traffic. I'm working with IT to get it back up. The Atlantic wants to republish. The Today Show called. What do you want me to tell them? The Atlantic. I sat up straighter, wincing slightly at the pull of surgical tape. The Today Show. I opened my blog's analytics, and the numbers made my head spin. 50,000 views in the first hour, 200,000 by midnight. The comments section had exploded, hundreds of people sharing their own stories of being the responsible one in families that took without giving, of siblings whose crises always took precedence, of parents who demanded endless emotional labor, while providing none in return. This is my exact family dynamic. Thank you for putting words to what I couldn't explain. Reading this at 3 a.m. crying, because finally someone said what I've been thinking for 20 years. My brother literally missed my wedding because his girlfriend was upset about her hair appointment. This essay made me realize that wasn't normal. I've been the family ATM and emotional dumping ground since I was 18, sending this to my therapist. But it was the retweets and shares that really caught my attention. Journalists, authors, therapists, and activists were amplifying the piece with their own commentary about family dysfunction, emotional abuse, and the particular burden placed on responsible children in dysfunctional systems. This brilliant essay by @evangrian_HFH should be required reading for anyone who's ever been the family scapegoat. Thread below on how birth order and family roles create these toxic dynamics. Dr. Sarah Chen, family therapist with 100K followers. Love without reciprocity is not love. This line from @eva_HFH's viral essay captures something we don't talk about enough in discussions of family trauma. Rebecca Morrison, best-selling author. My essay had become a rallying cry for a particular kind of family dysfunction that was apparently far more common than I'd realized. People were calling it emotional labor abuse and parentification trauma and the responsible child syndrome. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd spent 3 years building a nonprofit focused on heart health. And it was my own broken heart, metaphorically speaking, that was finally getting attention. My phone rang. "Jules, Ava, what the hell did you do?" Her voice was equal parts amazed and worried. "I told the truth," I said simply. "Well, the truth just broke the internet. Do you have any idea what's happening? Your essay is trending on 3 different platforms. I've got reporters calling me asking for your contact information, and," she paused, "your family is losing their shit." "What do you mean?" Chloe posted a 30-minute Instagram live at 4 a.m. claiming you've had a psychotic break, and that everything in your essay is fabricated for attention. She's painting herself as the victim of a smear campaign by her mentally unstable sister. I closed my eyes, feeling oddly calm despite the chaos Jules was describing. Of course Chloe would try to control the narrative, of course she would make herself the victim. What else? Your parents are apparently calling everyone they know, asking them not to read Ava's lies. Your mother left me a voicemail at 5 a.m. asking me to convince you to take it down because it's embarrassing. "Ang to the family, embarrassing," I repeated. "Not untrue, embarrassing." "Exactly. They're not denying any of it, they're just mad that you said it out loud." Jules paused. "Ava, I have to ask, are you sure you want to do this? Because there's no taking it back now. This thing has legs." I looked out the window at the city waking up below me. Somewhere out there, thousands of people were reading my words and recognizing their own pain in them. Somewhere, a family dynamic was being questioned for the first time. Somewhere, someone was finally understanding that they weren't crazy for feeling disposable. "I'm sure," I said. "Okay, then we need to talk strategy, because this is about to get a lot bigger." She was right. By 9 a.m. my phone was ringing every few minutes with interview requests. The story had been picked up by HuffPost, BuzzFeed, and 3 major news outlets. #ResponsibleChild was trending on Twitter, with thousands of people sharing their own stories of family neglect and emotional abuse. Dr. Bell stopped by during her morning rounds, raising an eyebrow at the organized chaos on my bedside table. Business cards from journalists, printouts of interview requests, my laptop surrounded by notes. Jules had dropped off. "Busy morning?" she asked with a wry smile. "I published an essay about my family last night. It apparently struck a nerve." She picked up one of the business cards. "CNN, I'd say so." "How are you feeling about all this attention?" "Terrified," I admitted, "but also relieved. Like I've been holding my breath for 29 years, and I finally get to exhale." "Good." She checked my chart, then looked at me seriously. "Ava, I don't normally give patients advice about their personal lives, but I'm going to make an exception. Don't let them gaslight you into thinking you're wrong for speaking your truth. I've seen families destroy people with guilt and manipulation. You're doing the right thing, even if it hurts them. Sometimes the right thing hurts, but you know what hurts more? Spending your whole life pretending that emotional abuse is love." After she left, I called Jules back. "Set up the interviews," I said. "Which ones?" "All of them." The first interview was with a producer from Good Morning America, conducted over FaceTime from my hospital bed. I'd changed into a real shirt. Sarah had brought clothes and Jules had helped me with makeup to hide the worst of my hospital pallor. "Ava, thank you for joining us," the producer said. Your essay has clearly resonated with millions of people. Can you tell us what prompted you to write it? I almost died 3 days ago. I said simply. I had a heart attack during a presentation about cardiac health. The irony wasn't lost on me. But while I was in surgery, my family was dealing with what they considered a more urgent crisis, my sister's bathroom renovation. The producer's eyes widened slightly. They didn't come to the hospital. They came 3 days later. With expensive flowers and explanations about why paint colors had taken priority over my emergency surgery. How did that make you feel? It made me realize that I'd been living in a fantasy about what family meant. I thought family meant showing up for each other. I thought love meant prioritizing someone's actual needs over your own convenience. I was wrong at least about my family. The interview continued for 20 minutes. Covering everything from the financial abuse to the pattern of emotional neglect that had characterized my childhood. By the time it ended, I felt drained but oddly powerful. That was perfect. Jules said afterward, you came across as completely credible and sympathetic. No one watching that is going to think you're the problem here. The second interview was with a journalist from The Atlantic who wanted to explore the broader cultural implications of my story. She was particularly interested in how immigrant families and high-achieving cultures contributed to these dynamics. There's this myth, I explained to her, that because my parents sacrificed to come to America, I owe them unlimited emotional and financial support. But sacrifice doesn't give someone the right to exploit their children. Gratitude doesn't mean accepting abuse. Do you consider what happened to you abuse? I paused, thinking about Dr. Bell's words. Yes, I do. Not physical abuse, but emotional and financial abuse. When you raise a child to believe their only value is what they can provide for others, when you teach them that their needs always come second, when you steal from their inheritance and guilt them into paying for your mistakes, that's abuse. Even if it comes wrapped in cultural expectations and family loyalty. The third interview was the hardest, a live segment on a podcast about family trauma. The host, a therapist named Dr. Amanda Ross, asked the question I'd been dreading. Ava, some people might say that airing your family's private business so publicly is cruel. How do you respond to that criticism? I would say that keeping family dysfunction private protects the abusers, not the victims. I replied, my family spent 29 years teaching me that my role was to make them look good, to solve their problems quietly, to absorb their poor behavior without complaint. They're upset now because I'm no longer willing to protect their reputation at the expense of my own well-being. And if they want to repair the relationship? Relationships require mutual effort. For 29 years, the effort was entirely one-sided. If they want to repair things, they need to start by acknowledging the harm they've caused and taking responsibility for their choices. But honestly, I'm not holding my breath. By noon, my essay had been shared over 100,000 times. The hashtag #ResponsibleChild had become a movement, with people sharing stories that made mine look tame by comparison. Parents who'd stolen their children's entire college funds, siblings who'd missed weddings, funerals, and graduations for increasingly trivial reasons. Families who'd convinced their responsible children that being treated badly was normal, even virtuous. But it was the personal messages that affected me most. Hundreds of emails from people thanking me for giving them permission to set boundaries, to stop accepting unacceptable behavior, to understand that family dysfunction wasn't their fault. Your essay saved my marriage. I've been trying to explain to my husband why I don't want to keep lending money to my brother, and he couldn't understand until he read your story. Now he gets it. I'm 63 years old and just realized I've been the family scapegoat my entire life. Better late than never, I guess. Thank you for helping me see clearly. I'm showing this to my teenage daughter, who's already being pressured to be the responsible one for her father's gambling addiction. She needs to know this isn't normal or healthy. It was validation on a scale I'd never imagined possible. For the first time in my life, I felt seen, understood, believed. But the attention wasn't universally positive. By afternoon, my family had mounted their counteroffensive. Chloe had posted a series of Instagram stories positioning herself as the victim of a vindictive sister's public attack. She was crying in most of them, explaining how hurtful and unfair my essay was, how I'd twisted everything to make her look bad. My sister is obviously having some kind of breakdown, she said in one particularly dramatic story, shot with perfect lighting despite her supposed distress. The medications from her surgery are clearly affecting her judgment. She's always been jealous of me. And now she's using her medical situation to get attention and sympathy by destroying our family's reputation. The comments on her posts were a mix of support from her followers and brutal criticism from people who'd read my essay. The contrast was stark. Poor Chloe. Family should support each other. Not air dirty laundry. Hashtag Team Chloe Girl. Your sister almost died and you were crying over paint colors? Maybe sit this one out. Did you seriously just blame heart surgery medication for your sister telling the truth about your behavior? This is exactly the kind of narcissistic deflection Ava wrote about. You're proving her point. My parents, meanwhile, had enlisted their friends and our extended family in a campaign to pressure me into taking down the essay. My phone was flooded with calls from aunts, uncles, and family friends who'd been fed a carefully crafted version of events that painted me as an ungrateful daughter having a mental health crisis. Ava dear, your mother is beside herself, said my Aunt Linda, calling from California. She says you've published terrible lies about the family. Surely you can't mean the things you've written. Every word is true, Aunt Linda, verifiably true, but, honey, family business should stay in the family. This kind of public humiliation was their choice when they chose paint colors over my emergency surgery. The conversation ended awkwardly, as did the dozen others like it, but what struck me was that not a single family member challenged the facts of my story. They were only upset that I'd made those facts public. By evening, the story had taken on a life of its own. Think pieces were being written about family trauma, emotional labor, and the specific burden placed on responsible children in immigrant families. Academic researchers were weighing in on the psychological patterns I described. Therapists were using my essay as a teaching tool with their patients. Jules arrived at the hospital around 6 p.m. with Chinese takeout and a stack of interview requests that had grown throughout the day. The New York Times wants to do a feature story, she said, settling into the visitor's chair. 60 Minutes called. And you're not going to believe this. Oprah's people reached out. Oprah, I nearly choked on my low mean. Apparently she read your essay this morning and wants to discuss featuring your story on her network. Something about how it connects to her own work on family trauma and healing. I set down my chopsticks, overwhelmed. 24 hours ago, I'd been an unknown nonprofit director recovering from surgery. Now I was becoming the face of a movement about family dysfunction and emotional abuse. Jules, what if I'm wrong? What if I am just being dramatic and vindictive like they're saying? She fixed me with a look that could have cut glass. Ava, you almost died. And your family missed it because your sister was upset about bathroom fixtures. If that's dramatic, then dramatic is the appropriate response. She was right, and I knew it. But the gaslighting campaign my family had launched was effective, even with overwhelming public support. Even with thousands of people validating my experience, part of me still wondered if I was the problem. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. When I opened it, my blood ran cold. Unknown 6:47 p.m. This is Chloe's lawyer. Your defamatory blog post has caused substantial damage to my client's reputation and business. Remove it immediately or face legal action. I showed the message to Jules, who snorted with laughter. She got a lawyer for what? Telling the truth about her behavior. Can she actually sue me? For what? Everything you wrote is demonstrably true. You have witnesses, medical records, text messages, bank statements. Let her try. Jules grinned. Actually, please let her try. Discovery in a defamation case would be fascinating. All those financial records, all those text messages during your medical emergency. Not the people who'd raised me to be their emotional support system and financial backup plan. When Sarah died, Min and Lan adopted you, but instead of being honest about your medical history, they created a fiction that you were their biological child. They buried the genetic information, ignored the warning signs, and raised you without ever telling you the truth about who you really are. Why? The word came out as barely a whisper. Because the truth was inconvenient. Your biological mother was the family embarrassment, pregnant at 18, unmarried, dating outside the Vietnamese community. It was easier to pretend you were their miracle baby than to deal with the messy reality of adoption and genetic risk factors. I thought about all the times I'd wondered why I looked slightly different from Chloe. Why my personality was so unlike theirs, why I'd never felt like I truly belonged in the family dynamic. The answers had been right there, hidden in medical files and adoption records my parents had buried. The chest pains when I was 14 should have triggered immediate genetic testing and cardiac screening, given your biological family history. Instead, they dismissed your symptoms and convinced you they were psychological. Nina's voice was tight with anger. I tried to intervene. I told them they were putting your life at risk by ignoring your medical needs. They banned me from family gatherings and told everyone I was mentally unstable and trying to destroy the family. Just like they're saying about me now. Exactly like they're saying about you now. It's their pattern. Anyone who threatens the family narrative gets labeled as crazy, vindictive, or disloyal. I looked at the medical reports again, seeing my childhood through new eyes, the chest pains during sports. The episodes of rapid heartbeat that my parents dismissed as anxiety, the fatigue that they attributed to being dramatic, all of it had been early warning signs of the cardiac condition that nearly killed me this week. They knew, I said flatly. They knew I was at risk, and they chose to ignore it. They chose to prioritize their image over your health, just like they chose paint colors over your emergency surgery. The parallels were so stark it took my breath away. My parents had been endangering my life through willful ignorance and negligence for 15 years. The pattern that had seemed like emotional dysfunction was actually much darker. It was systematic endangerment wrapped in plausible deniability. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Because you're finally ready to hear it, and because they're trying to have you declared mentally incompetent to stop you from telling the truth about them. Nina pulled out her phone and showed me a legal document. I received this from a private investigator they hired. They're building a case that you're having a psychiatric breakdown and need a conservatorship to protect you from yourself. I read the document, feeling sick. My parents were actually trying to have me declared incompetent so they could regain control over my finances and silence my public statements about them. But I have proof that contradicts their narrative, Nina continued. Medical records showing they ignored your health needs as a child. Adoption records proving they lied about your parentage. Financial documents showing they've been stealing from your inheritance for years. How do you have all this? I've been documenting their behavior for 15 years. Waiting for someone in the family to be strong enough to challenge them. When I saw your essay, I knew that person was you. I stared at the folder full of evidence, proof that my entire life had been built on lies, that my medical emergency had been preventable, that my parents had endangered my life multiple times through their negligence and denial. There's one more thing, Nina said gently, about your biological mother. Sarah didn't just die from cardiac issues. She died because she didn't know about her genetic risk factors and couldn't afford proper medical care. She was working 2 jobs to support you and skipping her own doctor's appointments to pay for your baby formula. The irony was devastating. My biological mother had literally died from the same kind of medical negligence that my adoptive parents had perpetuated, and they'd known it the entire time. I want to meet her family. I said suddenly, my real family, David Chen's family. I can help you with that. David went on to become a cardiologist, actually, probably because of his own genetic risks. He never knew what happened to Sarah, or that he had a daughter. Nina paused. He's been looking for you for years. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. I had a father, a real father, who'd been searching for me while I'd been trapped in a family that saw me as a resource to be exploited rather than a person to be loved. Does he know about my heart attack? I contacted him after I saw your essay. He's been trying to reach you through official channels, but your parents have been blocking all contact attempts. Nina handed me a business card. Dr. David Chen, cardiothoracic surgery. Johns Hopkins. He's been hoping to meet you your entire life. I held the card with trembling hands, staring at my biological father's name and credentials. A heart surgeon, a man who dedicated his life to preventing exactly the kind of medical emergency I'd just survived. He could have helped me, I said quietly, if I'd known about him. About my real medical history? This whole thing could have been prevented, yes. And that's why what your parents did isn't just emotional abuse, it's medical negligence that could have killed you. My phone rang. Daniel. Ava. We have a problem. Your parents just filed an emergency petition for guardianship. They're claiming you're suffering from post-surgical psychosis and need immediate protection from exploitation. I looked at Nina, who nodded grimly. Put him on speaker, she said. Daniel, I'm here with my Aunt Nina. She has information that changes everything. What kind of information? Nina leaned toward the phone. The kind that proves they've been lying about Ava's medical history, her parentage, and her legal rights, for 29 years. The kind that turns their guardianship petition into evidence of ongoing fraud and medical endangerment. There was a pause. Can you prove all that? I have adoption records, medical files, financial documents, and witness testimony spanning 15 years. Ava isn't their biological daughter. They've been stealing from her inheritance, and they've been ignoring her cardiac risk factors since she was 14. Jesus, Ava, are you okay? I looked at the evidence spread across my hospital bed, the truth about my real parents, my real medical history, my real identity. It was devastating and liberating at the same time. I'm better than okay, I said. I'm ready to fight back. What do you need from me? File a counterpetition, fraud, medical negligence, elder abuse, whatever applies when parents steal from their adult children and endanger their health through willful ignorance. And Daniel, Nina added, we're going to need a media strategy. Because this story just got a lot bigger than family dysfunction. This is about adoption fraud, medical malpractice, and systematic abuse spanning decades. After Daniel hung up, promising to file emergency motions within the hour, I sat in the silence of my hospital room processing everything I'd learned. My entire identity had been a lie. My medical emergency had been preventable. My real father was a heart surgeon who'd been looking for me for 29 years. Are you angry? Nina asked gently. I should be furious, I said, but honestly, I'm relieved. Everything finally makes sense. Why I never felt like I belonged. Why they treated me like an obligation rather than a daughter. Why my health issues were always dismissed. And now, I looked at my biological father's business card, then at the folder full of evidence that could expose my adoptive parents' decades of lies and negligence. Now I have the truth. And I'm going to use it. Nina smiled, the first genuinely happy expression I'd seen from anyone in my family, biological or otherwise, in 29 years. Good, she said, because the truth has been waiting a long time to come out. I opened my laptop and began typing again. My second essay would be different from the first. It wouldn't just be about family dysfunction, it would be about identity, truth, and what happens when the people who are supposed to protect you become the greatest threat to your survival. But first, I had a phone call to make. To a cardiologist in Baltimore who'd been waiting 29 years to meet his daughter. The number rang twice before a familiar voice answered, familiar in the way that genetics sometimes transcends me and distance. Dr. Chen speaking. Hi, I said, my voice shaking with emotion. This is Ava. I think you're my father. The silence that followed was full of 29 years of missed connections, followed by the sound of a grown man crying with relief. Ava, he whispered, I've been looking for you your whole life. And just like that, the family I'd always needed finally found me. Breaking, heart attack survivor discovers 29-year adoption cover-up that nearly cost her life. The headline splashed across CNN's homepage at 6 a.m., accompanied by side-by-side photos. Me in my hospital bed during yesterday's interview, and my biological father Dr. David Chen in his Johns Hopkins scrubs. By 7 a.m., it was the top story on every major news platform. I'd spent the previous evening on the phone with David. I couldn't bring myself to call him Dad yet, though he'd said I could, learning about the family I'd never known existed. His voice had broken when I told him about the chest pains at 14 that went uninvestigated, about the genetic testing that never happened, about the warning signs that had been dismissed as teenage dramatics. I could have prevented this, he'd said, and I could hear him crying on the other end of the line. If I'd known where you were, if they hadn't hidden your medical history, God, Ava, you could have died, but I didn't, I'd reminded him. And now we have a chance to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else, which was why I'd agreed to the emergency interview with Anderson Cooper, scheduled for 8 p.m. Nina's documentation was already being reviewed by CNN's legal team, and Daniel had prepared a comprehensive briefing on the fraud and medical negligence charges we were filing. But first, I had to get through the immediate fallout. My phone had been ringing nonstop since the story broke. Reporters, producers, lawyers, and advocacy groups all wanted to talk about what was being called one of the most shocking cases of adoption fraud and medical endangerment in recent memory. The adoption fraud angle had caught fire because it wasn't just personal, it was systemic. How many other adopted children were being raised without knowledge of crucial medical information? How many parents were prioritizing image over their children's health and safety? Jules arrived at 9 a.m. with coffee, bagels, and a stack of newspapers that made my head spin. The story had made front pages across the country, and the commentary was unanimous. What my adoptive parents had done wasn't just family dysfunction, it was criminal. "The Today Show wants you live tomorrow morning," she said, settling into what had become her permanent chair beside my bed. 60 Minutes wants to do a full investigation into adoption fraud and medical negligence, and... She paused dramatically. "Oprah personally called to say she wants to feature your story in her next special on family trauma and healing." "This feels surreal," I said, staring at a newspaper photo of myself that I didn't remember being taken. 3 days ago I was just a nonprofit director having a heart attack. Now I'm apparently the poster child for adoption fraud. "You're the poster child for surviving family abuse and medical negligence," Jules corrected, "and for fighting back." Instead of staying silent, my laptop chimed with an email notification. The sender made my stomach clench. "Chloe Nguyen, subject, you've gone to Farava. I don't know what lies that crazy aunt filled your head with, but this has to stop. You're destroying our family with these insane accusations." Dad had a panic attack this morning when he saw the news. "Mom can't stop crying. You're killing them with these lies. I know you're angry about the hospital thing, but this is psychotic. Making up stories about being adopted, claiming they hid medical information. It's delusional and cruel. Take down the interviews. Retract the statements. Apologize to our parents before you give Dad a heart attack too. If you don't, I'm going to tell everyone the truth about you. About your drinking problem in college. About the eating disorder you hid from everyone. About how you've always been jealous of me and desperate for attention. I know things about you that could destroy your precious reputation. Don't make me use them. Clope, your biological father is probably just some random doctor Nina found to back up her lies. You're so desperate to hurt Mom and Dad that you'll believe anything." I showed the email to Jules, who read it with increasing disbelief. "She's threatening to blackmail you," Jules said flatly. "And she's claiming your father's medical credentials are fake. She's lost her mind. The drinking and eating disorder stuff, she's not wrong about that. I did struggle with both in college. Because you were dealing with undiagnosed medical issues and a toxic family environment. That's not a character flaw, Ava, that's trauma response." My phone rang. "Daniel, Ava, we have developments, good and bad." "Good news first. Dr. Chen's medical records confirm everything Nina documented. Your biological family history, the adoption records, the medical recommendations that were ignored. We have an airtight case for fraud and negligence, and the bad news, your adoptive parents held a press conference an hour ago. They're claiming you're having a psychotic breakdown and that Dr. Chen is part of an elaborate conspiracy to exploit a vulnerable patient." I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar weight of their gaslighting, even from a distance. What exactly did they say? They portrayed themselves as heartbroken parents whose beloved daughter has been brainwashed by a vindictive sister and a predatory doctor. They're claiming the adoption records are forged, that Nina has been stalking the family for years, and that you're being manipulated while medically vulnerable. "But we have documentation." "We do." But they're playing the emotional angle, crying parents, confused about why their loving daughter has turned against them. It's effective theater. Jules grabbed my laptop and pulled up the video of the press conference. There were my adoptive parents, looking appropriately devastated, standing behind a podium with their lawyer. Lan's eyes were red-rimmed with tears, and Min looked like he'd aged a decade overnight. "Our daughter is very sick," Lan was saying, her voice breaking with practiced emotion. "The medications from her surgery have clearly affected her judgment. She's fallen under the influence of people who want to exploit her for financial gain and media attention. The adoption story is completely fabricated," their lawyer added. "Mr. and Mrs. Nguyen have documentation proving Ava is their biological daughter. These false allegations are the result of post-surgical trauma and manipulation by individuals with their own agenda. We just want our daughter back," Min said quietly. "We want her to get the psychiatric help she needs so we can heal as a family." I watched them perform their grief and confusion, marveling at how convincing they were. If I didn't have Nina's documentation, if I hadn't spent 29 years watching them prioritize image over truth, I might have believed them myself. "They're good," I said grimly. "They're sociopaths," Jules corrected, "but the evidence will speak for itself." My phone buzzed with a text from David. Saw the press conference. Don't let them gaslight you. I have 30 years of medical records proving you're my daughter. We'll get through this together. The simple support from this man I'd known for less than 24 hours meant more than 29 years of conditional love from the people who'd raised me. At 2 p.m., Dr. Bell stopped by with my discharge papers, and a grim expression. I've been getting calls all morning, she said, reporters wanting medical information, lawyers asking about your mental state, and 3 different people claiming to be family members demanding updates on your condition. I'm sorry you've been dragged into this. Don't apologize. I'm glad you're fighting back. She sat down and fixed me with a serious look. But I need to ask, are you prepared for how big this is going to get? Because medical fraud cases involving adoption and genetic information tend to attract a lot of attention, a lot of scrutiny. I'm prepared, or at least, I'm committed. Good, because you're going to need to be strong. People are going to question your motives, your mental state, your relationship with your adoptive family. They're going to pick apart every detail of your story looking for inconsistencies. What do you think I should do? Keep telling the truth, all of it. The messy parts, the complicated parts, the parts that make you look human rather than perfect. She handed me a business card. And consider talking to Dr. Sarah Kim. She's a psychiatrist who specializes in adoption trauma and family abuse. Having a professional evaluation on record might be helpful if this goes to court. After she left, I called Dr. Kim and scheduled an evaluation for the next morning. If my adoptive parents wanted to claim I was mentally unstable, I'd make sure to have professional documentation of my psychological state. At 4 p.m., Nina returned with more evidence and a surprising companion, a middle-aged Vietnamese woman I didn't recognize. Ava, this is Mrs. Pham. She was Sarah's best friend and witnessed your adoption process. Mrs. Pham sat down heavily, looking uncomfortable but determined. I came because what they're saying on the news is lies. I was there when Sarah died. I held you at her funeral. I watched Min An Len promise to raise you with love and honesty. What really happened? I asked. Sarah was so young, so scared. She'd been trying to track down your father to tell him about the heart problems in her family. Her mother died young from cardiac issues too. But David had graduated and moved away. And she couldn't find him. Mrs. Pham's voice broke slightly. When she collapsed, I drove her to the hospital. She made me promise that if anything happened to her, someone would make sure you knew about the family medical history. She was terrified you'd inherit the same problems and not know to get help. But they never told me. They said it would be too confusing, too painful. They convinced themselves that raising you as their own biological child would be easier for everyone. Mrs. Pham shook her head. I tried to argue. But they cut contact with everyone from Sarah's life. They wanted to pretend you'd always been theirs. Will you testify to this? That's why I'm here. I've kept Sarah's medical records all these years, hoping someday I'd be able to give them to you. When I saw the news, I knew it was time. By 6 p.m., we had 5 witnesses lined up to testify about the adoption, the cover-up, and the medical information that had been deliberately buried. Daniel had filed formal charges of fraud, medical endangerment, and elder abuse, and the media attention had reached a fever pitch that made my original essay look like a quiet family disagreement. Your story is becoming something bigger than family dysfunction, Jules said as we prepared for the Anderson Cooper interview. It's becoming a symbol of adoption rights, medical transparency, and family abuse. Are you ready for that responsibility? I thought about Sarah, my biological mother, dying young from a condition that could have been managed if she'd had proper medical care. I thought about David, searching for his daughter for 30 years while she lived 20 minutes away, unaware of her genetic risks. I thought about all the adopted children who might be living without crucial medical information because their adoptive parents found the truth inconvenient. I'm ready, I said. The Anderson Cooper interview went live at 8 p.m. By then, I was steady, prepared, and armed with documentation that made my adoptive parents' claims look ridiculous. Ava, your adoptive parents are claiming this entire story is fabricated, Anderson said. How do you respond to that? I respond with evidence, I said, holding up the folder Nina had brought. Birth certificates, adoption records, medical files dating back 30 years. If they want to claim I'm delusional, they're welcome to explain how I fabricated decades of official documentation. What do you want people to understand about your situation? I want people to understand that family dysfunction doesn't exist. In a vacuum, when parents consistently prioritize their image over their children's well-being, when they hide crucial medical information, when they steal from inheritance funds, that's not love. That's abuse, and children deserve better, regardless of whether they're biological or adopted. What's next for you? I'm going to keep speaking out. I'm going to work with adoption rights organizations to ensure other children have access to their medical histories, and I'm going to build a relationship with my biological father, who's been looking for me my entire life. Any final words for your adoptive family? I looked directly into the camera, thinking of Lan and Min watching from their carefully curated home, probably planning their next manipulation. The truth doesn't care about your comfort, and I'm done caring more about your feelings than my own survival. The interview ended, but the story was just beginning. Within an hour, #AdoptionTransparency was trending nationwide. Advocacy groups were calling for legislative changes, and medical professionals were discussing the dangers of hiding genetic information from adopted children. My phone rang. David, I'm proud of you. He said simply. Sarah would be proud of you too. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged, not because someone else had decided it, but because I'd chosen it for myself. The real family I'd been searching for my entire life wasn't the one that had raised me or even the one I'd been born into. It was the one I was building, one honest relationship at a time. The house looked smaller than I remembered. Same manicured lawn, same expensive cars in the circular driveway, same perfectly maintained foyer that had always mattered more to my adoptive parents than the dysfunction rotting behind it. But standing on the front steps with Daniel, Jules, and to Boston police officers, I felt like I was looking at a movie set rather than the home where I'd spent 29 years trying to earn love that was never really available. You sure you want to do this? Officer Martinez asked for the third time. We can handle the property retrieval without you present. I need to do this myself, I said, checking the list Daniel had helped me prepare. Besides, I want to see their faces when they realize I'm not the same person who left here 3 weeks ago. It had been a week since my discharge from the hospital. A week since the Anderson Cooper interview that had turned my story into a national conversation about adoption rights and medical transparency. In that week, I'd given testimony to the FBI about financial fraud, spoken with adoption advocacy groups about legislative reform, and been featured on the cover of Time magazine under the headline, "The Daughter Who Fought Back." More importantly, I'd spent hours on the phone with David, learning about my biological family's medical history, and beginning to build the father-daughter relationship I'd never known I was missing. We'd scheduled genetic counseling together, planned for me to visit Baltimore next month, and started the process of connecting with his extended family, my real extended family who'd been wondering about me for decades. But first, I had to collect my belongings from the people who'd stolen 30 years of my life through lies and medical negligence. Daniel rang the doorbell. The sound echoed through the house, followed by footsteps and muffled voices. When the door opened, it was Min who answered, looking like he'd aged a decade since I'd last seen him. Behind him, I could see Lan hovering in the foyer, her face carefully composed despite the chaos I knew was churning beneath. Ava, Min said quietly, we've been hoping you'd come home. I'm not coming home, I said evenly. I'm collecting my property. As outlined in the court order, I handed him the document Daniel had prepared. We have 2 hours for a supervised retrieval of personal belongings. Lan stepped forward, her eyes red-rimmed but her voice steady. Sweetheart, we need to talk. These people have filled your head with lies. We can prove. Mrs. Nguyen, Officer Martinez interrupted politely but firmly. This is a property retrieval, not a family mediation. Please allow Ms. Nguyen to collect her belongings without interference. I walked past them into the foyer, my eyes automatically cataloging the expensive furniture. The family photos that would need to be updated now that one daughter was no longer performing for the camera, the carefully curated image of success that had always mattered more than actual family connection. Where's Chloe? I asked. Upstairs, Lan said tightly. She's upset about all this media attention. It's been very difficult for her. Of course it had. Chloe's carefully cultivated influencer image was being destroyed by the revelation that her family emergency had consisted of bathroom fixtures while her sister was having emergency heart surgery. Her follower count had plummeted as people realized she was the self-absorbed sister from my viral essay. I started upstairs toward my old bedroom. but Chloe's voice stopped me halfway up. So the prodigal daughter returns. She appeared at the top of the stairs, looking like an expensive version of someone who'd been living on social media outrage for a week. Her hair was perfectly styled despite the early hour, and she was wearing an outfit that probably cost more than most people's rent. Hello, Chloe, hello. That's all you have to say, after destroying our family with your lies? I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt nothing. No anger, no hurt. No desperate desire for her approval. Just a mild curiosity about how someone could be so consistently self-centered even in the face of overwhelming evidence of their callousness. They're not lies, and you know it. Everything you've said is a lie. Her voice rose to the familiar pitch that had always preceded her most dramatic performances. The adoption story, the medical records, the financial stuff, all of it. Chloe, Daniel said from behind me. We have documentation, fake documentation. Anyone can forge papers. She was spiraling now, her voice echoing through the house, and even if some of it's true, so what? So what if Ava's adopted? So what if Mom and Dad made some mistakes? That doesn't give her the right to destroy our lives. I continued up the stairs, leaving her to rant at my back. My childhood bedroom was exactly as I'd left it, neat, organized, filled with books and awards and evidence of a lifetime spent trying to be the perfect daughter. Looking at it now felt like visiting a museum dedicated to someone else's life. Jules began packing books while I focused on personal documents, jewelry, and photos, the few things in this house that actually belonged to me rather than the persona I'd performed for 29 years. Ava Land's voice came from the doorway. She'd followed me upstairs, her expression desperate in a way I'd never seen before. Please, we need to talk. There's nothing to talk about. There's everything to talk about. You're destroying your father. The stress from all this media attention. The legal charges, his doctor says his blood pressure is dangerously high. You're going to give him a heart attack. I paused in my packing, struck by the irony. He's worried about having a heart attack. The same man who ignored my cardiac risk factors for 15 years. Maybe he should have thought about that before committing medical fraud. We never meant to hurt you. I turned to face her fully. What did you mean to do, then? When you buried Sarah's medical records? When you never told me about David? When you ignored my chest pains at 14? What exactly did you mean to do? We meant to give you a normal life, a stable family. We didn't want you to feel different, or damaged, or informed about my own medical history, or connected to my biological father, or aware that my inheritance money was being stolen to fund Chloe's failed businesses. Land's carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the flush of guilt that crept up her neck. The money was borrowed, not stolen. We always intended. You intended to pay it back with what? Chloe's influencer income, Dad's failed investments. Face it, Len, you stole from me, lied to me, and endangered my life. The only reason I'm alive is because someone else's daughter happened to have a cardiac surgeon working that night. Don't call me Lan, I'm your mother. The word hung in the air between us, hollow and desperate. I studied her face, looking for any sign of genuine remorse, any acknowledgement of the harm she'd caused. Instead, I saw only the familiar combination of entitlement and victimhood that had characterized every difficult conversation we'd ever had. No, I said quietly, you're not. Sarah Tran was my mother. She died worrying about my health and trying to make sure I'd be safe. You're just the woman who raised me to be your emotional support system and financial backup. Land's face crumpled, but I felt nothing, no guilt, no desire to comfort her, no urge to take back the truth to spare her feelings. She'd forfeited the right to my emotional protection when she'd chosen paint colors over my cardiac surgery. Ava, please, Mrs. Nguyen. Officer Martinez appeared in the doorway. I need to ask you to step back and allow Ms. Nguyen to continue her packing, as I returned to gathering my belongings. Chloe's voice drifted up from downstairs, apparently on the phone with someone. It's so unfair. She's been jealous of me our whole lives, and now she's using this medical thing to get attention and destroy our family? I'm the real victim here. Do you know what this is doing to my brand? My follower count has dropped by 60% even now, even in the middle of a family crisis that had made national news. Chloe was primarily concerned about her social media metrics. Some things never changed. I found what I was looking for in my desk drawer, a small jewelry box containing the few pieces of real jewelry I owned. My grandmother's ring, my real grandmother, Sarah's mother, that Nina had given me the week before, A necklace David had bought for Sarah before he knew she was pregnant, which she'd apparently saved for me, tangible connections to the family I'd never known existed. Those aren't yours, Chloe said from the doorway. She'd followed me upstairs, her face flushed with anger and something that looked suspiciously like panic. Actually, they are my biological grandmother's ring and a gift from my biological father. Your biological family are strangers. We're your real family, we raised you. I looked at her standing there, perfectly styled and completely oblivious to the irony of calling herself family while simultaneously trying to prevent me from claiming belongings that were rightfully mine. Chloe, can I ask you something? What? Do you actually care about me at all, as a person, not as someone who fixes your problems or pays your bills or makes you look good, but as your sister? She opened her mouth to answer, then seemed to realize it was a trap. Of course I care about you. Then why didn't you visit me in the hospital? I was dealing with a crisis. Paint colors, Chloe. You were dealing with paint colors while I was having emergency heart surgery. It wasn't just paint colors. The whole renovation was falling apart. My content calendar was ruined. I had brand partnerships depending on that bathroom reveal. There it was. Even when directly challenged about her priorities, she still couldn't admit that my near-death experience should have mattered more than her bathroom aesthetics. And that was more important than your sister's life. You weren't dying, you were being dramatic like always. The words hung in the air like a confession. In her desperation to justify her behavior, Chloe had finally said what I'd always suspected she believed, that my needs, my pain, my literal life or death medical emergency were all just performances designed to steal attention from her. There it is, I said quietly. The truth, I didn't mean, you meant exactly what you said, and now I know exactly who you are. I closed the jewelry box and put it in my bag. Then turned to face her one last time. For what it's worth, Chloe, I hope you find happiness, real happiness, not the kind that comes from likes and followers and bathroom renovations. But I won't be part of your life anymore. I won't be your emergency contact, your financial backup, your built-in audience for drama, or your scapegoat for family problems. You can't just abandon your family. I'm not abandoning my family. I'm abandoning the people who never treated me like family in the first place. Downstairs, I could hear men on the phone with their lawyer, probably planning their next legal maneuver. Through the window, I could see news vans parked on the street, the media attention that had horrified them but vindicated me. You'll regret this, Chloe said as I headed for the stairs. When you're old and alone and have no one, you'll regret pushing away the people who loved you. I paused at the top of the stairs, looking back at her one last time. Chloe, the people who loved me visited me in the hospital. They called to check on my recovery. They prioritized my health over bathroom fixtures. You're not one of those people, and you never have been. I left her standing there, still sputtering justifications and threats, and made my way downstairs with my belongings. In the foyer, Min was waiting with Lan, both of them wearing the kind of desperate expression that suggested they were about to make one final attempt at manipulation. Ava, Min said formally, there's something we need to tell you, something that might change how you feel about all this. I paused by the front door, curious despite myself. What? Lan stepped forward, her face streaked with tears that might have been genuine. You weren't just adopted. You were. Sarah wasn't. She seemed to struggle with the words. And for a moment I wondered if there was yet another layer of lies to uncover. Sarah wasn't my sister, she said finally. I stared at her, processing this new information. What do you mean? I mean Sarah Tran was a complete stranger. We bought you. The words hit me like a physical blow. Not adopted through proper channels, not placed with loving relatives, but bought, purchased like property. We were desperate for a second child, Min said quietly. Lan had fertility issues after Chloe, and the adoption agencies had long waiting lists. When we heard about Sarah, through informal channels, we paid her medical bills in exchange for you. You bought me. The words felt foreign in my mouth. We gave Sarah a better life, medical care, housing support during pregnancy. And we gave you a family, opportunities, everything you needed, except the truth, except my medical history, except any connection to my real father. We are your real family. Lan's voice broke with desperation. Biology doesn't matter. Love matters. We loved you. I looked at these people who'd raised me, who'd shaped my entire understanding of family and worth and belonging, and felt the last thread of connection finally snap. "No," I said simply. "You didn't love me, you own me." "There's a difference." I walked out of the house and didn't look back. Behind me, I could hear Chloe screaming something about legal action and media lies. But her voice faded as I reached the police car. "You okay?" Jules asked, taking the box of belongings from my hands. "I'm free," I said, and meant it. As we drove away from the house where I'd spent 29 years learning to be small, I felt something I'd never experienced before, complete certainty about who I was and what I deserved, not because someone else had decided it, but because I'd finally learned to decide for myself. The woman who walked out of that house was not the same person who'd collapsed during a presentation 3 weeks earlier. That woman had been performing love for people who were incapable of returning it. This woman knew the difference between family and ownership, between love and manipulation, between loyalty and self-destructs. My phone buzzed with a text from David. "How did it go?" "It went perfectly," I replied. "I'm ready to come home." For the first time in my life, I knew exactly what that word meant. The view from my new apartment in Santa Monica was nothing like the carefully manicured perfection of the Newton house I'd left behind. Instead of perfectly symmetrical landscaping, I could see the Pacific Ocean stretching endlessly toward the horizon, instead of expensive furniture chosen for show. I had a simple desk by the window where I wrote every morning, a comfortable couch where Jules crashed when she visited, and walls decorated with photos of people who actually cared about my well-being. 3 months had passed since I'd walked out of my adoptive parents' house for the last time. 3 months of therapy with Dr. Sarah Kim, who'd helped me understand that what I'd experienced wasn't just family dysfunction but systematic psychological abuse designed to keep me compliant and Yusuf. 3 months of building a relationship with David, who called every Sunday and had flown out twice to spend time with his daughter he'd never expected to find. Most importantly, 3 months of learning what it felt like to live without constantly managing other people's emotions or walking on eggshells to avoid triggering someone else's crisis. The cardiac screening program just hit its 1,000th patient, Jules announced, bursting through my front door with her usual dramatic flair and a bag of Thai takeout. 1,000 people who now know their heart health status because you decided to blow up your family's lies on national television. I smiled, setting aside the laptop where I'd been working on my book proposal. The memoir, tentatively titled The Backup Daughter, a story of medical fraud, family abuse, and finding freedom, had attracted interest from 6 publishers. With an advance large enough to fund my new nonprofit for at least 3 years, any of them high risk? I asked, settling onto the couch beside her. 47 so far. 47 people who found out they had cardiac conditions before they collapsed at work or died in their sleep. Jules handed me chopsticks and a container of pad thai. 47 Sarah Trans and Ava Nguyens who got the information they needed in time. The Sarah Tran Memorial Cardiac Screening Program had grown beyond anything I'd imagined when I'd first pitched it from my hospital bed. What had started as a way to honor my biological mother had become a national initiative, with satellite programs in 12 cities and partnerships with adoption agencies to ensure adoptees had access to genetic medical information. Speaking of the program, Jules continued, "We got another major donation. Guess who? Oprah again." "Nope. Your biological father's family. Apparently the Chens have decided you're their favorite newfound relative and want to fund a permanent endowment." I paused mid-bite, feeling that familiar warmth that came from being genuinely supported by people who asked for nothing in return. David's extended family had welcomed me with an enthusiasm that still caught me off guard. His sister had flown in from Seattle just to meet me. His parents, my biological grandparents, had spent an afternoon showing me photo albums and telling me stories about Sarah that my adoptive parents had never known. "They don't even know me that well yet," I said. "They know enough. David's been telling them about the brilliant daughter who survived medical negligence, exposed family fraud, and turned her trauma into a movement that's saving lives." Jules grinned. "Plus, his mom says you have Sarah's eyes and her stubborn streak." My phone buzzed with a text from David. "How's the writing going? Remember, you're having dinner with me and Margaret tomorrow. She's making her famous lasagna and wants to hear about your book deal." Margaret was David's wife, a kind, patient woman who'd been married to him for 20 years and had watched him search for his lost daughter without ever showing resentment or fatigue. When we'd first met, She'd hugged me like I was a long-lost family member she'd been waiting to welcome home. "Tomorrow's dinner with the real family?" Jules asked. Reading over my shoulder, "Stop calling them that, it makes me feel guilty about being happy." "You should feel guilty about being happy. You should feel guilty that you finally have people who show up when you need them, who celebrate your successes without trying to steal credit, and who don't think your near-death experience is less important than bathroom fixtures." I laughed. But Jules wasn't entirely wrong. Learning to accept love without strings attached had been one of the hardest parts of rebuilding my life. After 29 years of conditional affection, unconditional support felt almost suspicious. "Dr. Kim says that's normal," I said. "Abuse survivors often struggle to trust genuine kindness." "What else does Dr. Kim say?" "That I'm making excellent progress and that cutting contact with my adoptive family was the healthiest decision I've ever made." I paused, thinking about my last therapy session. "She also says I need to stop reading the comments on articles about my story." Jules winced. "Are they still bad?" "Mixed. Most people are supportive, but there's always a contingent insisting I'm ungrateful or vindictive or that family should forgive anything." I pulled up my laptop and showed her the latest article about my case. "Look at this comment thread. Famelifers 2023. No matter what they did wrong, they're still her parents. This girl is destroying people who raised her and loved her. Disgusting. Heart mom for 7. Did you read the article? They hid her medical history and she almost died. That's not love. That's negligence. Tread values. Children today have no respect. So what if they made mistakes? That's no reason to ruin their lives. Adaptivocate. Mistakes don't kill people. Medical fraud kills people." This woman is a hero for speaking out. Justice for Ava. Anyone saying she should forgive people who bought her like property and nearly let her die needs to examine their own family dynamics. "See what I mean?" I said. "Half the comments are people who get it, and half are people who think family abuse should be tolerated because family. The people who think you should have stayed silent are probably dealing with their own family dysfunction." Jules pointed out, "Your story threatens their worldview that family loyalty trumps everything else." She was probably right. In the months since going public, I'd received thousands of emails from people sharing their own stories of family abuse, financial exploitation, and medical negligence. Many of them had never spoken about their experiences before, convinced they were being dramatic or ungrateful. My laptop chimed with an email notification. The sender made me groan. "Chloe Nguyen, oh God, what now?" Jules asked. I opened the email reluctantly. Chloe had been trying to contact me for weeks, alternating between threats, guilt trips, and attempts at reconciliation that never included actual apologies. Subject: final attempt. Ava. "I know you're probably not reading these, but I have to try. One more time. Dad is in the hospital. He had a mild heart attack yesterday. The doctors say it's stress-related. Mom hasn't stopped crying since you left. She's lost 15 pounds and barely leaves her room. The legal bills are destroying them financially, and now with Dad's medical expenses. I know you're angry, but this has gone too far. Whatever we did wrong, we don't deserve to have our lives destroyed. Dad could die. And your last words to him were about money and lies. Please come home. Please help us figure this out. We're still your family, and we need you." "The lawsuit isn't going well. Our lawyer says your evidence is too strong and we should consider settling. But we can't afford what your lawyers are asking for. I'm begging you. Put aside your anger and help us. If not for Mom and Dad, then for me. I'm your sister that has to count for something. Chloe P.S. I'm attaching a picture of Dad in the hospital. Look at what you've done to him." I stared at the email, waiting to feel something: guilt, sadness, regret, any of the emotions Chloe was obviously trying to trigger. Instead, I felt only a mild irritation at the manipulation and a clinical interest in how predictable their tactics had become. "Let me guess," Jules said. "Someone's in the hospital, someone's having a breakdown, and somehow it's all your fault. Min had a heart attack. Apparently stress-related." Of course it was. Did she mention that the stress might be related to committing fraud, stealing from their daughter, and being exposed on national television? I showed Jules the email, watching her expression shift from amused to disgusted as she read. "Look at what you've done to him," she quoted. "Come home and help us." Jesus, Ava, even now they can't take responsibility for their own choices. The really sick part is that 6 months ago, this would have worked. I would have dropped everything, flown back to Boston, and figured out how to fix their problems while ignoring my own needs. But not now. I thought about it carefully. Min having a heart attack was genuinely concerning from a human perspective, but the man who'd ignored my cardiac risk factors for 15 years, who'd stolen from my inheritance, who'd participated in medical fraud that nearly killed me, that man had forfeited the right to expect me to prioritize his health over my own well-being. Not now, I said firmly. They made their choices. They chose to commit fraud, to lie to me for 30 years, to steal my inheritance money. They chose to prioritize Chloe's bathroom crisis over my emergency surgery. The consequences of those choices aren't my responsibility. Jules nodded approvingly. What about the settlement they mentioned? Daniel told me they're facing criminal charges for fraud and medical endangerment. The civil lawsuit is just the beginning. I closed the laptop. They can settle or not settle. They can declare bankruptcy or not. Their financial problems stopped being my problems the day I walked out of that house. My phone rang. Daniel. Ava. I just got a call from opposing counsel. They want to discuss settlement terms. What kind of terms? Full restitution for the stolen inheritance money, medical expenses, pain and suffering, and legal fees. We're looking at about $400,000 total. I whistled softly. Can they afford that? Not without selling the house and liquidating their retirement accounts. But that's not your problem. It's the natural consequence of their choices. What about the criminal charges? Those are proceeding separately. The DA's office is confident they can prove fraud and medical endangerment. Your adoptive parents are looking at potential jail time if convicted. After I hung up, Jules and I sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the Pacific. The view from my window was nothing like the one from my childhood bedroom in Newton, and that was exactly the point. Do you ever regret it? Jules asked quietly. Not the leaving. I know you don't regret that, but the go in public, the media attention, the whole national conversation thing? I considered the question. The past 3 months had been intense, in ways I'd never expected. Death threats from people who thought family loyalty trumped everything else, interview requests I couldn't possibly fulfill, strangers recognizing me in coffee shops and either thanking me for speaking out or lecturing me about forgiveness. But they'd also been the most authentic 3 months of my life. No. I said finally, I don't regret any of it. Not the essay, not the interviews, not the legal action. For the first time in my life, I'm living as myself instead of performing a role someone else wrote for me, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. The hard parts are mine now, my choices, my consequences, my struggles to work through, not someone else's drama that I have to manage while ignoring my own needs. My laptop chimed with another email. This one from a woman in Oregon, whose adoptive parents had hidden her genetic predisposition to breast cancer. She'd read my story, demanded her medical records, and discovered the information in time to get preventive surgery. You saved my life, she wrote, not just from cancer, but from a family dynamic that was slowly killing my spirit. Thank you for showing me it was possible to choose myself. I showed the email to Jules, who smiled with satisfaction. That's why you don't regret it, she said. Because your story is giving other people permission to save their own lives. That's the goal. Make sure what happened to me and Sarah doesn't happen to anyone else. My phone buzzed with a text from David. Saw the news about Min's heart attack. How are you handling it? I thought about his question as I typed my response. How was I handling the news that the man who'd raised me was in the hospital with the same kind of medical emergency I'd survived? I'm sad that anyone has to go through a heart attack, I replied. But I'm not responsible for the stress that caused it. They made their choices. And I made mine. Proud of you, he texted back. That's what healthy boundaries look like. Healthy boundaries? 3 months ago, I hadn't even known what those words meant. Now they were the foundation of my new life. As the evening settled around us, Jules pulled out her laptop and started working on the quarterly report for the cardiac screening program. I opened my manuscript and began writing the chapter about the day I walked out of my adoptive parents' house for the last time. The woman who left that house was not the same person who'd grown up there. I wrote, she was no longer performing love for people incapable of returning it. She was no longer accepting crumbs of affection from people who saw her as a resource rather than a person. She was finally, completely, authentically herself. And for the first time in 30 years. That was enough. Outside my window, The Pacific Ocean stretched toward a horizon full of possibilities I was finally free to explore. The waves continued, their endless rhythm, indifferent to human drama but somehow soothing in their constancy. I had found my rhythm to not the frantic pace of managing other people's emotions, but the steady beat of a life lived on my own terms. It was the sound of a heart that belonged to me, beating for someone who finally understood her own worth. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to help people in similar situations, new chapters to write in the story I was finally authoring for myself. But tonight, I was exactly where I belonged, in a home I'd chosen, with people who valued me, doing work that mattered. The backup daughter had finally become the main character in her own life, and the view was beautiful. 1 year later, I stood at the podium of the Los Angeles Convention Center, looking out at 3,000 faces gathered for the first national conference on adoption, transparency and medical rights. The banner behind me read "Breaking the Silence," a conference inspired by the backup daughter, and somewhere in that sea of attendees were adoption advocates, medical professionals, family trauma survivors, and legislators working to change laws that had allowed families like mine to hide life-threatening information for decades. Exactly 1 year ago, I began, my voice carrying clearly through the sound system. I collapsed from a heart attack that should never have happened. Not because heart attacks are always preventable, but because mine was caused by a genetic condition I'd never been told I had. Ignored by people who'd never bothered to inform me about my own medical history, the audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. But unlike the terrifying silence during my fundraising presentation that had ended in cardiac arrest, this silence felt supportive, engaged, ready to hear truth that might save their own lives or the lives of people they loved. Today, I want to talk about what I've learned in the year since that night, not just about medical transparency or family dysfunction, but about what it means to choose yourself when everyone around you has trained you to choose them. Instead, I clicked to my first slide, a photo of the Sarah Tran Memorial Cardiac Screening Program's mobile unit, parked outside a community center in East Los Angeles. This program has now screened over 10,000 people. We've identified 847 individuals with cardiac risk factors they didn't know they had. We've prevented an estimated 200 heart attacks, strokes, and sudden cardiac deaths. I paused, letting those numbers sink in. But the most important number isn't medical, it's personal. We've helped 3,247 adopted individuals gain access to their complete medical histories for the first time in their lives. The applause was thunderous, but I raised my hand to continue. These numbers represent more than medical interventions. They represent people who learned they had the right to information about their own bodies, their own histories, their own survival. People who discovered that family loyalty doesn't require self-destructs, and that speaking truth isn't betrayal, it's liberation. I advanced to the next slide, a graph showing the legislative changes that had resulted from our advocacy work. 6 states have now passed laws requiring adoptive parents to provide adoptees with complete medical histories by age 18. 12 states have strengthened penalties for medical fraud in adoption cases, and Congress is considering federal legislation that would create a national database of genetic medical information for adoptees. More applause. But I could see tears in some faces, people who recognized themselves in the story of hidden medical information and family dysfunction. But beyond the policy changes and medical interventions, I want to talk about something harder to quantify: what it looks like to rebuild a life on truth instead of lies, on genuine connection instead of performative loyalty, on self-respect instead of self-sacrifice. I clicked to a personal slide, a photo from last month's dinner with David, Margaret, and their extended family. 20 people gathered around a table, all of them connected to me through choice and affection rather than obligation and guilt. This is my family, I said simply. Not all of them are related to me biologically. Some I've known for 5 years, some for 5 months. What they have in common is that they show up. They celebrate my successes without trying to diminish them. They support my struggles without making them about themselves. They love me not for what I can do for them, but for who I am when I'm not doing anything for anyone. The silence in the room had shifted deeper now, more emotional. I could see people recognizing their own families, or the families they wished they had, or the families they were working to build. A year ago, I was performing love for people who saw me as a resource, I was so trained to manage everyone else's emotions that I almost died rather than burden them with mine. I was so committed to being the responsible one that I ignored my own needs until my body literally shut down to get my attention. I advanced to my final slide. The cover of my book. The Backup Daughter, which had been released 3 months earlier and spent 8 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. Writing this book taught me something I wish I'd learned 30 years earlier. The people who love you don't want you to be smaller. So they can feel bigger. They don't want you to sacrifice your health for their comfort. They don't want you to choose them at the expense of choosing yourself. I paused, thinking about the morning's email from my publisher. The book had sold 200,000 copies, with translation rights sold in 12 countries. But more importantly, it had generated thousands of letters from readers who'd recognized their own families in mine and started the difficult work of setting boundaries, seeking truth, and choosing themselves. The title The Backup Daughter came from realizing I'd spent my whole life being someone's plan B, my adoptive parents' backup when their preferred child was struggling, my sister's backup when her crises needed managing, my family's backup when their poor choices needed fixing. I looked out at the audience, seeing nods of recognition throughout the crowd. But here's what I've learned: you can't be anyone else's backup plan and your own first choice. Simultaneously, you can't prioritize everyone else's needs and develop a healthy relationship with your own. You can't perform love for people who aren't capable of returning it and still have energy left for people who are. The applause started before I finished the sentence, growing into a standing ovation that went on for several minutes. When it finally died down, I held up my hand for one final thought. If you take only one thing from my story, let it be this: choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's survival. And the people who tell you it's selfish are usually the ones who benefit from your self-sacrifice. I stepped back from the podium as the audience erupted again. But I was already thinking about the woman who'd be speaking next, Dr. Amanda Torres, an adoptee who'd used her experience with hidden medical information to become a genetic counselor specializing in adoption cases. After her would be Michael Chen, no relation to David, a family therapist who worked with estranged adult children and their parents. The conference had grown beyond anything I'd imagined when Jules and I first started planning it 6 months earlier. We'd expected maybe 500 attendees. Instead, we'd sold out a venue that held 3,000, with a waiting list of another 1,200 people. But the real success wasn't in the numbers, it was in the conversations I'd been having all weekend. Adult children, sharing stories of families who'd stolen from them, lied to them, endangered them. Adoptees discovering they weren't alone in having crucial information withheld. Medical professionals learning to ask better questions about family history and genetic risks. Ava, a young woman, approached me as I stepped off the stage. She looked nervous but determined, clutching a well-worn copy of my book. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I wanted to thank you." "You're not bothering me at all. What's your name?" "Jessica. Jessica Park. I'm adopted. And my parents always told me my birth mother died in a car accident and they didn't have any medical information." She paused, taking a deep breath. "After reading your book, I hired a private investigator. My birth mother is alive, and she has a family history of early onset Alzheimer's. I'm 26, and I just found out I carry the genetic markers." I felt my heart clench with familiar anger at families who prioritize their comfort over their children's survival. "How are you handling that news?" "It's terrifying, but I'm grateful. I can start preventive treatments, make informed decisions about having children, plan for the future." She smiled through tears. "Most importantly, I finally understood that my adoptive parents' lies weren't protecting me, they were protecting themselves from having to deal with complicated information." "Have you confronted them about it?" "I tried. They said I was being ungrateful and dramatic, that family secrets should stay secret, that I was destroying the family by asking questions." She straightened her shoulders, "So I stopped asking them, and started building relationships with people who think my health and my truth matter more than their comfort." I signed her book, writing, "Your truth is worth more than their comfort. Keep choosing yourself." As she walked away, I felt the familiar surge of validation that came from knowing my story had helped someone else save their own life, not just medically, but emotionally helped them understand that they deserved truth, honesty, and genuine care. Ready for the next panel? Jules appeared beside me, clipboard in hand and the slightly frazzled expression she wore when managing large events. "Which one am I on?" Building Healthy Relationships After Family Trauma. You're speaking with Dr. Kim and to other survivors. Dr. Sarah Kim had become more than my therapist. Over the past year, she'd become a collaborator in developing resources for people escaping family dysfunction. Our panel would focus on the practical aspects of rebuilding your life when the people who raised you turn out to be toxic. Any word from the legislative session in Sacramento? I asked as we walked toward the smaller conference room. The Adoption Transparency Bill passed committee this morning. It's going to the floor next week. Jules grinned. If it passes, California will have the strongest adoption rights laws in the country. And if it doesn't, we keep fighting. We've got momentum now. And momentum is hard to stop. She was right. What had started as my personal reckoning with family dysfunction had become a national conversation about adoption rights, medical transparency, and the difference between family loyalty and family abuse. I received emails daily from people sharing their own stories, asking for advice, or simply saying thank you for giving them permission to prioritize their own well-being. The panel went well. 90 minutes of practical advice about therapy, boundary setting, building chosen families, and navigating the guilt that came with refusing to accept unacceptable behavior from relatives. The audience asked thoughtful questions about everything from financial independence to dating while estranged from family to handling holidays without toxic relatives. During the Q&A, a middle-aged man raised his hand. My adult daughter cut contact with me 2 years ago after I missed her graduation because my other daughter was having a crisis. I've been trying to reconcile, but she won't respond to my calls or emails. What should I do? The room went quiet. It was the kind of question that came up at every event I spoke at. Parents who'd been called out for their behavior and wanted advice on how to restore relationships without actually changing. Can you tell me more about the crisis that caused you to miss your daughter's graduation? I asked carefully. My younger daughter was going through a difficult breakup. She was very upset, threatening to hurt herself. I felt I needed to be there for her. And did your older daughter know about this situation? Well, no, I didn't want to worry her before her big day. I exchanged glances with Dr. Kim, who nodded slightly. So from your older daughter's perspective, I said gently, you simply didn't show up to one of the most important days of her life, with no explanation about why something else was more important. I suppose that's how she saw it. What have you done since then to address her concerns? I've tried to explain about her sister's crisis, but she won't listen. She says I always prioritize her sister's drama over her achievements. Is that true? He was quiet for a long moment. Maybe. I never thought about it that way. Here's the thing, I said, leaning forward slightly. Your daughter didn't cut contact because of one missed graduation. She cut contact because that graduation was the final proof of a pattern she'd been experiencing her whole life. If you want to rebuild that relationship, you can't start with explanations. You have to start with accountability. What do you mean? You have to acknowledge the pattern, not just the incident. You have to take responsibility for how your choices affected her over time. Not just defend your reasons for making those choices, and you have to demonstrate that you understand why she feels she can't trust you to prioritize her when she needs you. Dr. Kim stepped in. We often see this in family reconciliation attempts. The person who caused harm wants to explain their behavior and be forgiven, but they're not willing to examine why that behavior was harmful or commit to changing the patterns that created it. So what should I do? Write her a letter, I suggested. Not asking for contact, not defending your choices, not explaining why you missed her graduation, just acknowledging that you see the pattern of prioritizing her sister's crises over her achievements, taking responsibility for how that affected her, and committing to doing the work to understand why you made those choices. And then you leave her alone and work on yourself. You go to therapy, you examine your relationship patterns, you learn about emotional labor and favoritism and family dynamics. I sent the email and closed my laptop, feeling the familiar mixture of sadness and hope that came with every message from someone just beginning to recognize their own worth. Looking back on the year since my collapse, I could see how every terrible moment had been necessary. The heart attack that forced me to face my family's neglect, the essay that went viral and connected me with others who understood, the legal battle that exposed the full extent of their lies, the media attention that turned my personal story into a movement for change, but most importantly, the gradual, difficult, beautiful process of learning to value myself as much as I'd always valued everyone else. I walked to the window and looked out at the city lights, thinking about all the people in all those buildings who might be living their own version of my story, accepting crumbs of affection from people who saw them as resources, managing everyone else's emotions while ignoring their own, believing that love required self-destructs. Tomorrow I'd fly home to my chosen life, my chosen family, my chosen work. I'd continue writing, speaking, and advocating for people who deserved better than what they'd been given. I'd keep learning how to accept love without strings attached and how to offer support without depleting myself. But tonight, I was exactly where I needed to be. A woman who'd learned the difference between being needed and being valued, between family loyalty and family abuse, between love and ownership. The backup daughter had finally become the main character in her own life, and the story she was writing was one of truth, healing, and the revolutionary act of choosing herself. Outside my window, the city sparkled with infinite possibilities, the same way my future looked when I'd finally learned to see myself as worthy of all of them.